Hi, so in this recording we're going to look at how you would actually measure the contribution made by an event. So basically we're going to look at what's known as direct and indirect spending. So in this table here I've got some examples of each of these. So in terms of direct spending, you might have your tickets, your food and drink that people might spend at the site, accommodation, transport. There could be all sorts of other spend that might be on site and off site. And then there's other spending which is more indirect, so the visitor won't know about this spending. So it's indirect, it doesn't come straight from the visitor or the person attending an event. It actually is accrued in the supply chain. So this is perhaps something the event company is having to pay for. So there might be things like toilets, the acts that come to the event, security staff, all these other things, first aid, licenses, lighting, staging, etc. So there's a variety of things which are indirect there. So the visitors themselves won't directly spend on these. So as you can see, the direct spending, I've just pretty much said this, is the spending by the visitors, and then the indirect spending is that is basically accrued by firms who are supplying that event. So the event management company gets direct spending from the visitors, the attendees coming along, but then some of that actually filters out to the people who are suppliers. So the example there is of Lion Flooring, who supply Glastonbury with various flooring for parts of the site, and that's an indirect impact. So the direct and the indirect equals the contribution from that event. So if we look at spending at music festivals, and the music festivals are quite diverse because you have the big multi-day music festivals like outdoor festivals where people go camping, but you also have music festivals which might be hosted in venues that people go to maybe just for a day, or they go and stay elsewhere on site. So typically the ticket, so the event itself, entry to the event, will account for quite a large proportion of spending. But also on-site spending can be quite a lot as well, because people might buy food and drink, they might buy other merchandise on the site. And off-site spending, this will be very varied, so it can be quite low. So for festivals at a large site, so like things like Glastonbury, this can be really quite low. Whereas if you actually have a festival that has no on-site accommodation, it could be much higher, so up to about 80%. And I can illustrate that in a table in a moment. So if we look at spending at Glastonbury, and I'm afraid this is a little bit dated, this is 2007, but it's the only data I could actually find on this. So you can see that in terms of the spend on site, there's quite a lot spent more on food and drink on site, because actually people don't actually tend to go off site much at Glastonbury, and it's maybe only afterwards, before and afterwards, they do shopping. There's actually less spent on site, surprisingly. I actually think this is quite a surprising figure, and more spent off site, but that may be as people visit other places having departed. Entertainment and services, very little. Accommodation, there's very little spent off site, because most of it is actually going to be spent on site. Travel and transport is actually obviously an off-site spend, and then there's £1 spent on something else, and this doesn't include, as it says at the bottom there, the tickets. But you can kind of get a picture that there's a mixture of on and off-site spending there. And if we look at is for various festivals, you can see what I mean about the variability. So at the bottom of this, towards the bottom half of this table, we've got the festivals where people stay on site. So there is some kind of on-site accommodation, usually camping. And again, some of this is quite dated, because I can see at least one festival there that doesn't exist anymore. So it says data is mainly for 2009. So but I don't think some of these factors will have changed that much. But I am telling you it is old. So Starbucks Manchester Jazz Festival, you see the Manchester Jazz Festival is a festival which doesn't have any on-site accommodation. It takes place in Manchester city centre, in various venues, and therefore people will be paying for accommodation if they've come for several days. So you kind of get the picture here that it will be quite varied. So these are all sorts of things that would need to be taken into account when people are trying to understand the contribution of an event. So Manchester Jazz Festival, its contribution doesn't really just lie in its ticket sales and spending on anything at the event, because there's a lot of spending outside the event in that case.